Yo, what's up guys, Capmaster here with my first build video of the league. I just wanted to give you a quick insight into my league starter character because I felt it went remarkably well, and I just wanted to let you know where we are currently and what my plans are going forward and how I've liked the build and whether I recommend it. So first things first, I'm gonna let you see how the build works. We got a Alked Defiled Cathedral here that we're gonna throw on. We're going to put on Maven and we're gonna put on Ritual just to have some juice on there. And what I decided to start with this league is a Glacial Hammer Slayer. I've played roughly 10-15 hours now. I think I did 2 streams of 7-8 hours content, of course including breaks and all that, and we made it to level 82 in our progression, engaging a lot with the league mechanic of course. And I've transitioned from leveling with 2-handers into leveling with a 1-hander and a shield just for the defensive, because Glacial Hammer is a very melee ability. Now let's go in. Like, bring our buffs up, bring this up, bring that up, and open things. And as you can see, we do damage, guys. So as you can see, thanks to additional hits from melee strike skills, we got a really decent coverage for being a melee build. And generally speaking, you just have to walk up to a pack, hit it once for it to shatter and explode, because Glacial Hammer also has a built-in 33% cull on frozen enemies that are non-unique. The single target is also fairly decent, although this guy will have a number of... Oh. He does have the rogue's grip. But yeah, so basically this is how the build works. You may have seen that I was taking damage there. This is because I am using trauma stacking to scale the damage of the build. We have Glacial Hammer linked with elemental damage with attacks, which is pretty much core because Glacial Hammer has a built-in 100% physical to cold damage conversion. And as you can see, every third successive strike freezes enemy as though dealing 380% more damage. So very, very powerful freeze every 3 times you attack enemies. And as you can see in the text up above, if a non-unique enemy is frozen and is on less than 1/3 life, they will shatter when hit by Glacial Hammer. Now, this check doesn't happen after you hit, but it happens before you hit, but it checks the amount of life they will have after the hit. So if a single hit brings an enemy to less than 1/3 life, they will instantly shatter and disappear. We're also using Ruthless, where every third attack deals a ruthless blow. And we're using Trauma Support, which is essentially the bone shatter mechanic of stacking trauma stacks that then add big flat physical to that attack, but also makes it so that you take an amount of physical damage per trauma. You hit yourself when you're gaining more trauma, and the more trauma you already have, the harder you're hitting yourself. So it's really important to have good physical mitigation and to have good recovery. That's why we're using Slayer, because with Slayer Leech, life leech effects are not removed when unreserved life is filled. You always have a big amount of leech going as long as you're attacking consistently, because the leech never ends when you're at full life. So the moment that the damage is coming in, you're already starting to recover because the leech is already going. You don't need to hit after you've brought yourself down to 50% and then hit, build up that leech again. No, the leech is already fully going. Because we're using Glacial Hammer and we're consistently freezing and chilling, we can use Frostbreath, which is a unique weapon that costs around 1 chaos and is incredibly hard to beat on this build. You need a very, very good 1-hander in order to be better than this, because this doesn't have the greatest damage, but it has attacks with this weapon deal double damage to chilled enemies. I also managed on my playthrough to find a Le Hub of All, which is a nice boost to attributes and generic stats like damage and all-res. And I'm using Doredri's Damning, which allows me to apply an additional curse. So not only am I running Mark on hit with Poacher's Mark to gain life and mana on hit, as well as a nice amount of flat fizz to hits against the cursed enemies, but also generates me frenzy charges whenever I kill an enemy affected by Poacher's Mark. With Mark on hit, this automatically triggers when I hit a rare or unique enemy with an attack. So it's pretty much always on enemies where it matters. On top of that, I'm using a Frostbite manually on my W, which just further reduces cold resistance on enemies. I'm also using Flesh and Spirit to get Rampage and more Vaal Souls. And other than that, we pretty much just have filler gear with life and resistances and some useful damage stats right now, which we're obviously looking to upgrade and improve as we go along. Another important thing is the Galvanic Hammer Anoint, which is extremely cheap. extremely budget. Galvanic Hammer is the passive up here in this mace cluster next to Templar, and it gives you 10% increased accuracy rating with maces and sceptres, 30% increased elemental damage with maces and sceptres, as well as damage with weapons penetrates 5% elemental resist, which is obviously very high value, and it only costs a clear, a sepia, and a crimson oil, which is very easy to get early on, and you should always have this on your amulet as soon as you have a little bit of economic power to acquire that crimson oil. Doesn't matter what amulet you're running. As you can see, I'm running the crappiest amulet ever, which just gives me a tiny little bit of cold damage, scales my armor, gives me the filler stats that I need, and some mana regen, but it's still, this Anoint alone boosted my damage quite significantly. Like, if you're looking at my damage without the amulet, is 22.7, and if I put the amulet on, it's 25.3. So that looks to me like a solid 10% damage gain just from the 5% increased cold damage and the Anoint, as well as I believe the strength factors in, because strength counts to melee physical damage at 1/5 of its value, so that definitely does factor in as well prior to conversion. Now we're stacking frenzy charges with Slayer because using Masterful Form, your maximum endurance charges is equal to your maximum frenzy charges, and you need endurance charges in order to mitigate the physical damage that you're taking from trauma. This allows you to pretty much go only into max frenzy charges and get the benefits per frenzy charge here, as well as increased charge duration. So you always got a decent amount of charges up. As you can see, I'm sitting at 6 endurance and 6 frenzy right now. And it does make everything a lot more cozy. Now I also want to talk about my tincture. Now, as you may have noticed, I am running a tincture here. Now, the tincture that I chose to run is one that I found very early on in Act 2 already, or in Act 3. And this is a prismatic tincture, which on its implicit has up to 100% increased elemental damage with melee weapons. So right out the gate, very, very high value as long as it's on. As you know, tinctures have been added to the core game. Every character can run one tincture by default, and tinctures now inflict a mana burn every 0.7 seconds. So when I switch this on, at first I can sustain it quite well, but the longer this is on, the more mana burn will stack up, and as you can see, eventually my mana decays and it goes to 0, at which point this switches off, goes on cooldown, and then becomes available again. On the explicit stats, I have cooldown recovery rate and 19% melee weapon attack speed, which is global on your character for all attacks made with melee weapons, so this also scales my leap slam, for example, if I have the tincture up. So extremely high value explicit mod here, because up to 20% attack speed, or 19% in this case is the max roll, but you can obviously have higher tiers, is really, really good. In order to keep my tincture on as long as possible, I have a number of investments into mana. Now, first of all, when pathing out of Slayer, we went into Spirit of War to get some mana leech and reduced mana cost of attacks, but we have refunded it since, and I've gone into mana flows in order to increase my total mana pool, meaning the absolute amount of mana left after my percentage reservation is bigger, and this also gives me a little bit of regen and a little bit of intelligence, which I do need to level my intelligence gems, such as Frostbite and Clarity. I'm running Clarity. Why am I running Clarity? So per default, this build is supposed to be running Determination and Hatred, and then a low-level Precision in order to help with accuracy for the damage bonus from Precise Technique, for which the condition is that your accuracy is higher than your maximum life. Now, without Precision, my accuracy is only 2,200 because I have really, really bad gear. So I do need the Precision right now to get my accuracy to higher than my life if I want to have a meaningful amount of life. I mean, you don't want to run through maps with 2k of life, which means right now I can't afford to run Determination because I still need a decently high Precision. Also, I found while leveling that auto exertion with Intimidating Cry is extremely good, because it means that the Intimidating Cry exertion buff that makes the attacks deal double damage is up quite a lot. And you can see right now here, my next 2 attacks are exerted to deal double damage, and this also doesn't expire, right? There's no cooldown or something like that. If I leap slam now, it exerts the leap slam, which is also useful, but you can switch that off via a number of methods. So essentially, I need a lot of gear with good accuracy, and I'll need to manually use my Warcry in order to be able to run Determination, which eventually I want to do, but right now I'm still sacrificing Determination and using auto exertion as well as Precision. And then because we have some mana left, I decided to throw in Clarity to get a decent amount of flat mana regen per second, which puts me at a total of above 60 mana regen per second right now, which makes it so that my Tincture sustains extremely long in combat. On top of that, I'm running an Enduring Hallowed Mana Flask, which doesn't end when your mana is full. So this also gives you a decent amount of mana recovery on top. So all things combined, I can let my Tincture run for 10 seconds and more without running into problems. The problem is that currently I don't have a lot of phys mitigation, so specifically these encounters where enemies deal more physical damage are extremely painful, and I should probably not be doing these rituals. Alright, we found Orichalcum. This is the one that I recommend people to do always, because you get that strong buff from Beta that allows you to kill enemies extremely quickly because it arcs down lightning from the heavens. As you can see, Beta's Wrath, which does not count as a shrine buff here, and then when you run into enemies, you actually get those big ass lightnings coming down that deal extremely high AoE and help you to kill bosses and tanky rares within a matter of seconds. Really, really good. Now, before I send you off, I want to quickly talk about one thing that I implemented into the build that I didn't expect at all. And that is when I started using Flesh and Spirit, because I found them just for the Rampage, I realized that I wasn't using a Vaal skill. Now, with Flesh and Spirits, you get additional Vaal souls if you've Rampaged recently. So this seems like a waste to not be running a Vaal skill. And I was like, well, what Vaal skill could I be using? And I decided for Vaal Rejuvenation Totem, which I've never used before, but is extremely helpful because I don't have that much phys mitigation, and when I'm in a big pack of things, I throw down the Vaal Rejuvenation Totem, which gives me a decent amount of life regen per second, which is essentially 20% on my life right now. It's a flat 647.7 life per second, so more than 20% of my life per second for the duration of the totem. The totem lasts 4 seconds, and while the totem is up and I'm in the area of the totem's life is removed for a percentage of 40% damage from hits against me. I take damage, 40% of that damage is taken from the totem's life rather than me, if it's hit damage. So it's like a mini mind over matter effect, like totem over matter, and I felt it's extremely good, and it's up a lot. I will eventually replace this with Vaal Grace or like another defensive or offensive Vaal aura, but for the time being, I'm really happy with that. Now for this specific build, I decided to not make my own build, but I'm loosely following Goratha's PoE for the Glacial Hammer, and there is endgame stuff that is extremely strong that we're going to be doing. I'll be talking about this in a future video because I don't want to make this too long, but check out Goratha's guide if you want to learn more about how this build will scale into endgame. That's it so far. I hope you enjoyed the video and you learned a little bit. Let me know what your starter is and how it went for you so far in 3.25 Settlers of Kulgur Path of Exile, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.
I know a lot of people want to send blankets or water. Just send your cash.